we are going to tailor and transform this fabulous 70s dress into being more fabulous. To make this dress more my style, I need to do something about these sleeves here, and I'd like to take the bottom skirt and make it into a high-low so that way I can show off a little leg. And then we need to do something about the bodice. I need to tailor it up. It's got to be a little smaller, especially in here. But after I take it in, my bodice is going to be smaller. And what the heck am I going to do with that gathered skirt? How am I going to fit it all back together? We'll follow along and find out. So I put the dress on a dress form that is roughly my size so I can tailor it up. If you don't have a dress form at home, that's totally okay. Put it on inside out and grab a friend. If you don't have a friend around to help you, that's okay too. Just go ahead and stand in the mirror with your pins. So we're going to start with tailoring up the side seam of the bodice. And the first thing we need to do is seam rip a section of the skirt away from the bodice. So I've already seam ripped about 2 inches on both sides. So I have the bodice removed from the skirt of the dress. And now what I can do is hold some of the fabric and take it in as much as I want. So when we pin, we always want to make sure that we're pinning where our new sewing line would be. So that way you know exactly how it's going to fit when you go and try it on. So I'm going to go straight up to the underarm, which runs into the sleeve. So now I know I want to take in that much all the way up to the underarm of the sleeve. And we are going to have to take in some of the sleeve to make sure that this fits right. So I'm going to pin into the sleeve a bit, blending it about 4 inches down. There we go. So now I'm going to be taking it in from the waist all the way up into the sleeve. Okay, so now I have both sides pinned up. If you've used a dress form, definitely try this on right now and make sure it fits okay. If you've got it on yourself, obviously you know how it's going to fit. I tried it on and it fits great. So now let's move on to the next step. The next step is going to be marking where you put all of those pins. So grab your favorite marking tool. So we're going to mark right where we have the pins. So go ahead and just mark all the way along where you have pins. After you do that, you can take them out. And you're going to do that to both sides. Speaking of doing the same thing to both sides, what I want you to do now is measure from the seam line to that little chalk mark that you put and see what the distance is on both sides. And if it's the same, great. If it's not, I want you to add them together and divide by 2 and put a new mark. So that way you're going to end up taking in your dress evenly all the way up. And go ahead and measure every few inches wherever you put a mark and measure both sides just to make sure you're going to get the same distance on both sides of your dress. Now that we have them marked, it's time to sew it up. And we're going to be sewing right on those chalk lines. But on your sleeve, if you randomly stopped right at your underarm like I did, you're going to want to make sure you blend in that seam another 5 or 6 inches down. We want this to be a very gradual taper into the sleeve because we don't actually want to take it in on the bottom of the sleeve, just the top at the underarm. So you can see my chalk mark ended here, but we're going to gradually keep sewing until it blends back into the seam of the existing sleeve. I'm going to start at the waist seam. I'm using a regular stitch, straight stitch with a stitch length of 2.5. We're going to sew right up, connecting our dots that we drew on the fabric. When we get to the sleeve, we're just going to turn just a little bit, come on to the sleeve. And remember to just blend back into that original seam line gradually. And then you can backstitch and cut. So we are going to do the same thing to the other side. So we have the side of the bodice and the sleeve taken on. Now you can see these original stitching lines in here. Now you can go ahead and cut off most of that. Just make sure you leave at least the 1/4 inch seam allowance. I highly suggest a 1/2 inch. Because this is a vintage dress, I'm actually going to leave all the fabric in here, What I'm going to do is just use my seam ripper and open up these seams so that way I can iron them open. Now I'm going to do this because, you know, maybe someone down the line wants to make this dress bigger. They'll have the opportunity to do that. Or maybe I put on 15 pounds and I want to make this dress bigger. You never know. So I just seam rip that side open and you can see the extra fabric that we have here on the inside of the dress. And now I'm just going to iron that nice and flat. And I'm going to do that to both sides. I'm going to use this awesome new iron I just got called Laura Star, and it doesn't burn any sort of fabric. And we are ironing all synthetic fabric right now. Look at that. No burn, no cinch. Ah, love it. So I have it right side face out, and we've got it nice and taken in. We've got our new seam there, and that was easy, right? That was so easy. The bodice and the sleeve taken in just like that. Now it's time to move on to the gathers in the waist. So now we have this gathered part of the skirt that we need to fit back into the waist. And why did we have to disconnect the skirt from the bodice? Well, the bodice had to be taken in all the way down to the skirt, and we didn't just want to take a sharp angle into the waist because we needed to take it in at the waist, which means you have to undo the seam that is intersecting with the waist. So anytime you need to take in a part that is intersecting with another seam, you have to take apart the seam, take it in, put it back together. So to put the skirt back on, what we need to do is gather the skirt back up and make it fit into the new bodice section. To get this fabric gathered back up into the waist, we're gonna do like we normally would. We're just gonna run a few basting stitches in this little area, gather it back up, and then sew the bodice to the skirt. And we're gonna do that on both sides. Come on, let me show you. I have my basting stitch on, and we're just gonna run a basting stitch right down the skirt. When you put on a basting stitch, you put your stitch length to 6, or as big as it'll go on your machine. My machine actually goes to 5. Pull it out, leave a nice long thread tail, and now what we're going to do is pull one of the ends and gather it up. So you can see that area there gathering up. We're just gonna pull it down a little. There we go. So now we've got that area scrunched up. So I'm gonna turn the dress inside out and sew it together. So I have it turned inside out and I have all my fabric layers lined up. I've got my lining gathered, I've got my organza gathered, and I've got my bodice here, nice and flat on top of it. I have the pins here to hold all of my layers together, and I'm gonna make sure I'm starting in the existing seam so that way we don't get any puckers. So we're starting in the existing seam, and we're just gonna work our way all the way down this little opening. When we get to the pins, we're going to remove them. And you're just gonna be sewing over all those new gathers. Make sure your fabric is nice and flat. Make sure you don't get any tucks or puckers in there. And just continue all the way down and make sure you end in the existing seam, back stitch and cut. So when you're done, it should look something like that. Our layers are nice and back together. And now we're gonna do the same thing to the other side. Now we have the waist sewn back together, and it looks like we never even ripped it apart and sewed it back together. Look at that. It looks beautiful. Yeah, we got a chalk mark there, but we'll get that out. So I have one last step on my waist, which is attaching this belt back on by the zipper. So if you've got a bow like this, just go ahead and attach it back on. But I assume you probably don't have a bow like that, because you probably don't have a vintage dress like this you're working on. So on to our last step, which is taking the front of the dress, ruching it up, and making it into a high-low. To ruche up the front of this dress, I'm gonna be using my marking pen and a ruler, and I'm just gonna draw a line straight down from the hem of the underskirt all the way down to the bottom of my skirt. And I'm gonna do this 4 times. So I'm gonna go ahead and draw 1. I'm going to space these out about 4 to 5 inches. So I'm creating lines so that way I know exactly where to put my basting stitches later. You know what? Disappearing ink is great, but now when it disappears too soon. So let's switch sides. Now I'm done drawing all my lines. So what I'm going to do is run a basting stitch down all of the lines. I'm actually gonna back stitch at the top where my little underskirt is. And then I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna gather up all the fabric. to that underskirt, and then I'm gonna stitch it down in place. And what this is gonna do, it's gonna kind of create a curtain effect. It's gonna gather up the bottom of the skirt and create this ruching along the front hem. We did it, we finished the dress, and we finished ruching the bottom, and it is looking so cool. I cannot wait to try this on. This ruche turned out great. I love the way it looks across the front of the dress. It's just gonna give it a nice dramatic look when I try it on. Here's our fabulous revamped 70s dress. Our bodice fits, our sleeves fit, our waist fits, and we have a fabulous ruched hem. Check out this high-low. I just love it. I think it is so fun. Instead of just having a plain clean line there, we've got some extra gathers. I love thrifting and vintage hunting and finding something that isn't just quite right, but it has potential. Great fabric, it's got bows, it's got ruffles, but you put it on and it's an immediate know how it is, but you know that you can totally upcycle it, tailor it, transform it, and make it your own style. I think it's super rewarding to take something, save it from a landfill, and make it your own. Thanks so much for watching Sewing Anastasia today. If you have any questions on tailoring a dress or the sleeve that goes into it, or the waist that goes into it, make sure you leave it down below in the comments and I'll get back with you as soon as I can. And if you have any suggestions for upcoming videos, leave that down below in the comments too. And if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, give it some applause, and subscribe to Sewing Anastasia if you're not already a subscriber. And make sure you hit the notification bell so you know when the new videos come out. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for watching today. These videos are for you guys. And if you don't already follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Threads, you know, all of it, make sure you follow so that way we can stay connected and creative together. And if you're interested in taking a sewing class with me in Chicago, make sure you check out all the classes at sewinganastasia.com, and we also do some virtually as well. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.